Well, I really like fixed income. I enjoy it. It fits my personality. Fixed income involves a lot of math. It involves a lot of conceptual relationships. It involves beginning to understand interrelationships and implications. It leads to things you can do to solve problems in the real world. That appeals to me. It's why I spent over half my investment career on the fixed income side of things and, had success there. I know it's not everybody's thing. The very things I like about it really turn off a lot of people, including a lot of charter holders. It's too much math. It's too interrelated. Gee, can't they just, why do I have to keep thinking about A and B and C and D and E? And when I put them all together, I end up over here. It's just too much. I get that. I can relate to it. And everybody feels it. Everybody reaches that point. It was just too much. Well, the good news is we got a one-slide module. To recap some things we've talked about, to lay some groundwork of things we're going to talk about in more detail, to use some terms you've heard before: a bullet, a ladder, and a barbell portfolio. We're looking at bonds. Let's just think of them as zero coupon bonds, just for really simplicity. When will the money come in? Well, in the case of a zero, the maturity is the duration. So we could think about this as when, or we could also think about it as maturity. When you talk about the ideas in the bond world of bullet, ladder, and barbell, you're just talking about how you're going to distribute the assets along the yield curve. So I've drawn a yield curve, and I've drawn as a function of duration instead of maturity. What points along the yield curve am I going to pick to make my portfolio? When we have this discussion, by inference, we're talking about three different ways to get to the same duration. We're going to equalize the duration, small parallel shifts, they all act the same. But subtly, they're not identical. So let's talk about, they've all got the same duration. And let's say these are all default-free government securities. Liquidity should be good for all of them. There's no credit risk. There's no spread risk. All we have are different ways of achieving duration. So our exposure is to different points on the yield curve. Our key rate durations will differ. They won't behave the same for non-parallel shifts. They'll absolutely be different. They're exposed to different points. So we're summarizing some things and we're previewing. And I actually find the Institute a little bit odd that they put this topic in this reading, because what it really is an introduction to the next reading. So we can just kind of relax and we can start to pick up some issues. If I go with that bullet, now look at this. I've drawn a normal yield curve, upward sloping. I put all my money there. What if I'd use the barbell? What would my yield to maturity be? It would be a weighted average of those 2 points. If I had used the barbell instead of the single point, I would have driven down the yield. Said another way, by concentrating on the bullet, I almost always get the maximum yield possible. If I distribute my cash flows out away from the bullet, I can do it, but I will lower the yield on the portfolio, assuming the yield curve is concave. If it wasn't concave, if it was convex, that would be different. But the yield curves are almost always concave. That's the only thing the Institute even covers in this entire section at level 3, because it is so dominant in the real world. And I'm going to be able to point out to you why that's true. You just need to accept it as a fact and deal with what the Institute is covering. But we're even going to see why the yield curve probably should be concave. What if I go to the ladder? A ladder means an equal distribution across multiple points with the same average duration. Now that provides periodic cash flows. That could be a practical benefit. It's also exposing me to multiple points along the yield curve, price reinvestment. Yes, I may have price risk if I need to liquidate early, but I'm distributed across the curve with reinvestment. They're just saying it's distributed. That's all they're saying by this. Those are just ways of saying we're spread around natural liquidity. In some ways, I wish we'd gone immediately to the other extreme, the barbell. We put everything at the two extremes. Maximum dispersion of cash flow, all with the same duration when we look at the three. And what did we learn about convexity? Convexity is a function of two things, duration and dispersion. So these all have the same duration. All three of these are the same duration, but the dispersions are different. Dispersion doesn't mean equal distribution. It means push everything to the extremes. That's the definition of dispersion here. So this is going to have the maximum dispersion. They're all going to have the same duration, so the barbell is going to have the maximum convexity. But remember our argument, it's also going to have the lowest yield. So you're back to an inherent economic trade-off. Do you want convexity? Convexity is nice if there are big changes in rates. But to get the convexity, you're going to have to give up yield. If the yield curve is concave, you will have a normal economic trade-off. If the yield curve for any reason was convex, notice, you could go to the bullet and you could drive up the yield and get more convexity. That'd be a free lunch. Economies are usually not that stupid. That's why you basically never see convex yield curves. You only basically get concave yield curves because there's an inherent economic driver. That means there's a trade-off between better yield versus better convexity, and that's the way the real world marks. Markets are sophisticated. They're in aggregate smart. They don't give you a free lunch. You want the yield or do you want the convexity? They're both good things. You got to pick. And that's going to be the basis of things we're going to start to dig into as we go into yield curve management in the next reading.